Ancient Rome's most sadistic emperors and their favorite tortures. You can smell the pitch before you see the flames. It clings to skin, thick and suffocating as hands tie the final knot. Around you, laughter echoes through a garden, lit not by lanterns but by bodies. Human torches arranged like ornamental trees while Rome's elite sip wine and applaud the artistry of their emperor's imagination. This is not war. This is dinner entertainment. And before we step deeper into this nightmare, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? It's remarkable how a story this ancient still pulls us all into the same horrified silence, no matter the century or continent separating us. The year is 64 CE. Rome has just burned for 9 days straight, 14 districts reduced to ash and rubble. The emperor, a man named Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, stands accused by whispers in every marketplace. Did he set the fire himself to clear land for his golden palace? History will never answer that question with certainty. But what follows is documented not in rumor, but in ink and stone, recorded by historians like Tacitus, who could not look away even as Rome transformed its executions into theater. Nero needed scapegoats. He chose the Christians, a small, already despised sect whose refusal to worship Roman gods made them easy targets. What he did next wasn't punishment. It was spectacle, choreographed with the precision of a stage production. The condemned were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs in broad daylight. Others were nailed to crosses in rows so long they formed corridors of agony. But the torches, those were Nero's signature. Victims were coated in flammable resin, tied to stakes throughout the imperial gardens, and set ablaze as the sun descended. They burned slowly, deliberately, their screams forming a grotesque soundtrack to Nero's evening parties. Ancient sources describe how the emperor himself would sometimes drive a chariot through these living bonfires, the firelight dancing across marble statues and the faces of senators who dared not look away. To flinch was to suggest sympathy, and sympathy, in Nero's Rome, could be fatal. But here's what gnaws at you when you read Tacitus centuries later. It's not just that this happened, it's that it was normalized. Guests arrived in their finest robes, musicians played. Conversations continued as if the air wasn't thick with burning flesh. The machinery of empire hummed along, indifferent to whether justice meant law or simply whatever entertained the man wearing the purple. Nero's cruelty extended far beyond nameless Christians. His own mother, Agrippina the Younger, the woman who had maneuvered and murdered to place her son on the throne, eventually became his target. The first assassination attempt involved sabotaging her bedroom ceiling. When that failed, he invited her onto a boat designed to collapse mid-voyage. When she survived by swimming to shore, Nero abandoned subtlety and sent soldiers to finish the job. According to historical accounts, Agrippina's final words were to bare her womb and command them to strike there first, the place that had given birth to such a monster. What makes Nero's reign so chilling isn't random violence. It's the deliberate fusion of art and atrocity. He didn't hide his cruelty behind closed doors or justify it with legal language. He staged it, lit it, scored it with music. Fire became his medium. And Rome, whether it wanted to or not, became his audience. But if Nero made cruelty into theater, the emperor who came decades earlier turned it into comedy, the kind where laughter meant someone was about to die. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History remembers him as Caligula, a childhood nickname meaning little soldier's boot. When he ascended to power in 37 CE following the paranoid, reclusive reign of Tiberius, Rome exhaled with relief. Finally, a young, energetic emperor with family ties to the beloved Germanicus, the optimism lasted approximately 6 months. Then, something shifted. Ancient historians debated whether it was illness, madness, or simply the intoxication of absolute power. But the result was undeniable. Caligula's reign became a carnival of humiliation and death, where mockery and murder performed an inseparable dance. Suetonius records a phrase often attributed to Caligula, whether he spoke it or not: "Let them hate me, so long as they fear me." It captures the essence of his rule perfectly. Fear wasn't a side effect of his policies. It was the policy, and he deployed it with a creativity that would be admirable if it weren't so horrifying. Senators summoned to the palace never knew if they were arriving for a banquet or a beheading. Sometimes both. Cassius Dio describes dinners where Caligula would order an execution mid-meal, have the body dragged across the floor while guests continued eating, then turn to his remaining company and laugh at their frozen faces. The joke, always, was that there was no joke. The punchline was their terror. During gladiatorial games, when the spectacle lagged, Caligula reportedly ordered entire sections of the audience thrown into the arena to be torn apart by wild animals. Not as punishment for any crime, simply to maintain entertainment value. The crowd came to watch death. Caligula ensured they got more than they bargained for. He particularly enjoyed impossible choices. A father might be forced to attend his son's execution and then join the emperor for a feast immediately after, required to laugh at Caligula's jokes as if nothing had happened. To refuse was to join the condemned. To comply was to lose your humanity piece by piece, meal by meal. This psychological torture, the forced performance of normalcy atop unbearable grief, may have been crueler than any physical torment. Women of the highest Roman families were not spared. Caligula would publicly humiliate the wives and daughters of senators, then mock their husbands for failing to protect them. The message was clear: no title, no lineage, no virtue could shield you from imperial whim. What's most disturbing about Caligula's brief 4-year reign isn't the body count. Other emperors killed more. It's the randomness, the sense that death arrived not through conspiracy or treason, but through boredom. An emperor yawned, and someone died. An emperor laughed, and families were destroyed. Power became performance art, and the entire empire was trapped in the audience. His assassination in 41 CE came as a relief so profound that the Praetorian Guard, despite their oath to protect the emperor, either participated or simply stepped aside. But Rome had learned something it couldn't unlearn: that laughter, once weaponized, never sounds innocent again. Yet there's a third kind of cruelty, perhaps the coldest of all, the kind that doesn't seek an audience. Titus Flavius Domitianus ruled from 81 to 96 CE, and if you lived through those years, you learned to fear silence more than screams. Domitian didn't stage public burnings or fill arenas with carnage for entertainment. His violence was methodical, bureaucratic, invisible. It happened in rooms with locked doors and no witnesses. It happened through whispers, accusations, and the slow disappearance of voices that had once spoken freely. Under Domitian, Rome developed a peculiar silence, the kind that fills a city when no one dares speak honestly. He expanded the laws of majestas, treason, until the definition became so broad it could swallow anything. A poorly timed cough during an imperial speech. A letter that mentioned the emperor's name without sufficient reverence. A silence that lasted too long when others praised him. Informants, called delatores, thrived. Neighbors reported neighbors. Friends betrayed friends. The reward for successful accusation was a portion of the condemned person's confiscated estate. Trust became a luxury Rome could no longer afford. Torture, traditionally reserved for slaves under Roman law, expanded upward. Nobles found themselves in interrogation chambers, their screams absorbed by stone walls no citizen would ever see. Pliny the Younger, writing after Domitian's death with the relief of a survivor, described the era as one where informers swarmed and no man dared speak his thoughts. Domitian insisted on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. It wasn't theatrical vanity like Caligula's antics, it was systematic erasure of republican tradition. the final burial of any pretense that the Senate held power. Senators attended meetings where they voted unanimously for whatever Domitian desired, knowing dissent meant not just death but erasure, their names chiseled from monuments, their property seized, their families tainted by association. Executions under Domitian were often unannounced. People simply vanished. One day, a colleague sat beside you. The next day, his seat was empty, and no one asked why. To ask was to invite suspicion. The empire learned to avert its eyes. His palaces reflected this aesthetic perfectly, vast, ornate, and terrifyingly quiet. Marble corridors stretched endlessly, footsteps echoing in spaces designed to remind visitors how small and vulnerable they were. Beauty became oppressive. Grandeur became threat. When Domitian was finally assassinated in 96 CE, a conspiracy that included his own wife, Domitia Longina, and several freedmen, the Senate moved swiftly to condemn his memory through damnatio memoriae. His name was chiseled from inscriptions. His statues were torn down or defaced. Rome tried desperately to forget him, but some things carve deeper than marble. Domitian's legacy wasn't monuments. It was the learned behavior of an empire that discovered silence could be survival. He proved you didn't need fire or arenas. You just needed locked doors and the certainty that walls had ears. And then there was the emperor who didn't hide his violence or bureaucratize it. He performed it personally, covered in blood and sweat, craving applause. Lucius Aurelius Commodus inherited the throne in 180 CE from his father, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor whose meditations preached stoicism, duty, and self-restraint. Commodus read none of it, or if he did, he understood it as instructions for everyone except himself. His obsession with the gladiatorial arena wasn't symbolic. Commodus didn't just sponsor games or watch from the imperial box. He entered the Colosseum as a combatant, dressed in armor, holding weapons, fighting opponents who had been carefully selected to lose. Cassius Dio records that Commodus claimed to have killed hundreds of opponents. The victories were staged. Wounded men, frightened animals, unarmed criminals. But the blood was real, and that's what mattered to him. He slaughtered exotic animals by the dozen, lions, ostriches, elephants, even a giraffe, shot with arrows while spectators watched their emperor play Hercules. He renamed months of the calendar after his own titles. He commissioned statues of himself dressed as Hercules, club in hand, lion skin draped across shoulders that had never known real battle. But here's the cruelty embedded in performance. Romans were forced to watch their emperor debase the highest office in the empire while pretending to celebrate it. Senators who failed to applaud enthusiastically were noted. One who laughed at the wrong moment during a performance was later found dead. His death ruled natural causes that everyone knew were anything but natural. Commodus turned state violence into personal gratification. Where Nero at least pretended his cruelty served some purpose, scapegoating Christians, eliminating rivals, Commodus killed simply because the act itself satisfied him. The arena was his therapy. Rome was his audience, and applause was mandatory. His assassination in 192 CE came not from a grand conspiracy but from exhaustion. His inner circle, tired of unpredictability, tired of danger, tired of watching their emperor covered in blood, hired a wrestler named Narcissus to strangle him in his bath. Rome didn't mourn. The Senate immediately declared his memory condemned, another name scraped from history's surface. But the stain remained. Under Commodus, the question stopped being, how could an emperor do this? And became, what does it mean when the highest authority in an empire craves the work of an executioner? These four men, Nero, Caligula, Domitian, Commodus, didn't rule Rome the same way. Fire and spectacle, laughter and humiliation, silence and disappearance, performance and blood sport. Each found a different language for cruelty, but they all spoke the same fundamental truth. that power without restraint doesn't create order, it creates theater, and when governance becomes performance, citizens stop being people and become props. Tacitus, writing in the shadow of these reigns, captured it perfectly when he described Nero's victims. They perished not for the public good, but to gratify the cruelty of one man. One man. That's all it took. One person in whom law, tradition, senate, and gods all dissolved into irrelevance. One person for whom mercy became weakness and restraint became boring. One person who discovered that absolute power doesn't corrupt gradually. It reveals instantly what was always waiting beneath. The scorch marks from Nero's torches faded from the gardens. The bodies dragged across Caligula's banquet floors were swept away. The names Domitian erased were eventually restored by later emperors. Commodus's statues were torn down. Rome rebuilt. History moved forward. But empires remember. And what Rome remembered was this, that the distance between civilization and atrocity is not measured in centuries or laws. It's measured in the space between one person's impulse and the word no. And when no one is left to say that word, torches are lit, doors are locked, arenas fill with screams, and history writes itself in ash and blood and silence. The human torches burned bright enough to read by, bright enough that Roman citizens, centuries later, could still see exactly who they had been, and exactly what they had allowed to happen while they looked away.